In the spring of 1994, in the Central African nation of Rwanda, 800,000 people were killed by their fellow citizens following the plane crash and death of the Rwandan president. The Western world at first stayed out, then evacuated Westerners, then belatedly offered assistance. The cause of the killing is complicated, but much of it comes from the resentment and hatred between two ethnic groups, the Hutus and the Tutsis. While most of those killed were Tutsis, moderate Hutus were also targeted and killed. In addition, reprisals against Hutus following the initial killings meant that horrific things were done to members of both ethnic groups. How did a genocide of this scale take place in such a short period of time? Even before its colonization by Belgium in 1919, the nation of Rwanda was very conscious of ethnicities. A minority tribe, the Tutsis, had emigrated from Ethiopia and were mainly cattle farmers. The majority group, the Hutus, were mainly subsistence farmers. The Tutsis were generally taller and lighter skinned than the Hutus, though intermarriage had blurred the lines between the tribes. The Belgian colonists, however, favored the Tutsis, providing them with government jobs and more educational opportunities. They also issued identity cards requiring a stamp of Tutsi, Hutu, or Twa, a third ethnic group. During the late 1950s and early 1960s, an independence movement spread throughout Africa as many European colonial powers withdrew. In Rwanda, Belgian officials began placing Hutus in positions of power, and some violent action against Tutsis took place. Many Tutsis fled to surrounding nations, but desired at some point to return to Rwanda. In the 1980s, an army, the Rwandanese Patriotic Front, or RPF, was organized to help Tutsis return to Rwanda and take power. As the Rwandan economy floundered due to a drop in international coffee prices and large-scale unemployment, outside groups like the World Bank pressured the Hutus in power to become more democratic and share power with the Tutsis. United Nations troops were also dispatched to Rwanda to help keep peace between the citizens. Tension broke out into extreme violence when a mysterious plane crash killed the presidents of both Rwanda and Burundi, who were on the verge of a peace agreement. A group of extremist Hutus formed a militia called the Interahamwe and began a campaign of murder and rape against Tutsis, who were labeled cockroaches by the radio stations in Kigali, the capital. As many as 250,000 women may have been raped, in addition to the 800,000 men and women and children who were killed, most hacked to death with machetes. The unrest descended into civil war as members of the Tutsi RPF militia began fighting with the Rwandan army. Hutus, fearing reprisals for the killings, fled in huge numbers, most to the neighboring nation of Zaire, now called the Democratic Republic of the Congo. Large refugee camps were established with very poor conditions. In one 2-day period, 14,000 Hutu refugees died of cholera. How did the international community respond to the deteriorating and then chaotic situation in Rwanda? The United Nations force of 2,000 was reduced to just 270 for the entire nation in 1994, at a time when the UN commander on the ground was asking for more troops. Western nations, including the United States and France, at first largely ignored the situation. When France did send troops to protect some Tutsis in the south of the country, they also allowed Hutus responsible for the killings to escape. The U.S. took no action, partly because of a mission to Somalia the previous year, which had resulted in 19 U.S. soldiers' deaths and an embarrassing failure to help alleviate a humanitarian disaster. Intervening in Rwanda would have required the U.S. to state that genocide was taking place, and the Clinton administration was unwilling to do so. The wave of killings ended in the summer of 1994 as the RPF took control of the Rwandan territory and government. Not only had hundreds of thousands of Rwandans been killed, one of the largest refugees, migrations, and tragedies in history took place as the Hutus fled to the Congo. Trials to bring Hutus to justice began in 1996. Over 100,000 individuals were accused of genocidal actions. To deal with the huge number of cases at a time when most of the judicial system was in disarray, local judicial tribunals called gacaca courts were established. Villages were elected to the panels and individuals were tried, often in outdoor, improvised court settings, and sentences meted out. Hutus who were repentant and seeking reconciliation with their former villagers were given light sentences. In addition, an international criminal tribunal was set up in neighboring Tanzania, and cases were heard beginning in 1997. It convicted the prime minister to life imprisonment, along with 32 other defendants. This was the first major genocide trial since Nuremberg. Was there any good that resulted from the Rwandan Genocide of 1994? Yes, first, the gacaca court system helped reconcile former enemies. The ID card label of Hutu and Tutsi was discontinued. The Western nations, which had refused to intervene, began serious discussions of both preventing genocide and punishing those who committed genocidal acts. Finally, because of the tragic situations in Africa and southeastern Europe, due to the Bosnian crisis, the United Nations developed the doctrine of responsibility to protect, RTP, which has led to humanitarian efforts in the Congo and Libya and other locations. Rwanda is healing as a nation, though it's doing it slowly. Former Tutsi and Hutu enemies have begun some reconciliation efforts, largely without foreign assistance. The judicial tribunals continue to identify criminals, though most are Hutu and not Tutsi. Finally, children in Rwanda are being taught about Rwandan history and the divisions that led to genocide in a hope that future tragedies can be avoided.